Welcome to this first video. In this video, we're going to attempt to demonstrate the operation of this M5OD, find out whether or not it's in good condition before we take it apart. First thing I want to do is just see if we do have 5 forward gears, if we have reverse, if we have neutral. What I've got set up, I've got a pair of vice grips attached to the output shaft, and inside the bell housing I've also got a set of vice grips attached to the input shaft. You can't see the input shaft, so I'll count those turns off. Now first of all, I've got the transmission in neutral, and I can turn the input shaft and the output shaft does not turn. Well, there, it made a liar out of me. The output shaft will drag around a little bit, but I'm turning the input shaft repeatedly. I've made several rotations with it, and the output shaft is not turning. So that is in neutral. If I'm the engine turning the input shaft, the engine's able to freewheel without the vehicle moving. So the output shaft will be attached to the drive shaft and on out to the rear axle. So we do have neutral. The input shaft is a little bit hard to turn. We'll see if we find a reason for that as we take the transmission apart or not. But we have a neutral gear in first. In first gear, I'm going to come over and up, engage first gear, and I'll count my input shaft turns. You can see the output shaft, and I've got my input shaft has gone around 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, about 3.5, maybe 3 3/4 times. I'm going to call it 2.6, or I'm sorry, 3.6. We'll look up the ratios tonight in class, but I'm going to call it 3.6 to 1 as approximation for that first gear ratio. 3.6 is a pretty low gear ratio. The higher the number, the lower the gear ratio. You get torque multiplication by whatever that ratio is. So my engine turns approximately 3.5 or 3 3/4 times for every 1 turn of my output shaft. That's going to be good for acceleration, but I'm not going to be able to go very fast. So when I shift to second gear, now my input shaft goes around 1, 2, maybe 2 1/4 times. So about 2.2 to 1. Again, we'll look the gear ratios up in class, but about 2 1/4 times on my input shaft for 1 turn of my output shaft. So when I go to second gear, I've got higher vehicle speed for the same engine RPM as compared to first gear, and that trend is going to continue as we go through our gears. Third gear is going to be another step in the same direction. In order to get my output shaft to go around 1 time, my input shaft goes around about 1.5 times. So about 1.5 turns of my input shaft to get 1 turn of my output shaft. Now I've still got torque multiplication. I've still got higher engine RPM than what I do drive shaft speed. And in most vehicles, acceleration is still pretty good in third gear. When I go to fourth, now I expect a direct 1-to-1 gear ratio. And when we get this transmission apart, we'll see exactly why that is. But when I turn my input shaft 1 time, my output shaft goes around 1 time. In fourth gear, in most 5-speed transmissions, my input shaft is locked directly to my output shaft, and everything turns is a 1-to-1 ratio, or quote, direct drive. Now back in the 70s, early 80s, we might not have had overdrive in every transmission. Direct drive might have been high gear. But in this transmission, this M5OD, high gear is 5th. And in 5th gear, my input shaft is not going to go a full turn. In order to get my output shaft to go around 1 time, my input shaft only goes around about 3/4 of a turn. So about a 0.75 to 1. Now I no longer have torque multiplication. I have speed multiplication, but in order to gain that speed, I have to give up torque. So I've got less torque coming out of the transmission than what I do going in, but I have a higher RPM, and that's overdrive, or 5th gear in this M5OD. Now if I try to go straight to 5th, directly to reverse, it will not allow that. That's the interlock function of the shifter. If I relax and come back to neutral, and then I engage reverse, I'm going to turn the input shaft the same direction I have every time, but now my output shaft goes in the opposite direction. I've turned my input shaft once, twice, 3 times, about 3.5 times. So my input shaft went around about 3.5 times to get my output shaft to go around 1 time. Reverse is normally close to first gear. Not the same, but normally close to what first gear is. You don't need high vehicle speed in reverse, but you might need that torque multiplication to do some pulling in reverse or to back up a hill or whatever. So reverse gear is going to be a nice low gear ratio. So this is an M5OD out of a 1998 Ranger. It'll be similar to a lot of 5-speed transmissions in operation, and we'll take it apart in other videos and see exactly how that works.